Welcome to the iPad Podcast, a weekly podcast from Mac's Future.
Okay, welcome to the iPad Podcast. This is Lex at Mac'sFuture.com, and today is Saturday, May 19th, 2012. And hey, listen, I missed last weekend. I was kind of swamped with stuff, and I got the Apple Podcast out, which is also on iTunes. That's Apple Podcast by Mac'sFuture.com. Me, Lex. And I didn't get the iPad Podcast out, so I'm going to do it today, Saturday. And this is episode 99, and today is May 19th. And so there's a lot of iPad-related news and Apple-related news to discuss, so let's get to it. This is a chit-chat-free podcast all about the iPad, and you can help it out by giving it any sort of positive review in the iTunes store, or go to YouTube and go to my channel, Mac's Future, and give it a positive review there, or go to Blip TV and look for Mac's Future there. So here we go. So good news if you have an iPad and you also have a Time Warner cable account. As you may know, Time Warner's been in a legal battle with Viacom, which I guess owns MTV, which owns TV Land and Comedy Central. And basically, they did not take too kindly to Time Warner releasing its free iPad app, which works with your Time Warner cable box and allows you to see for free any channels, well, certain channels that you have in your cable subscription. And Verizon basically said, Viacom, which I guess owned CBS, was unhappy, and they litigated. And so recently they resolved their litigation, and it looks like Viacom channels will be appearing in the iPad app. Cnet.com has a story. If you're looking at the video version of this, I go to their website. And it says here in Cnet's blog, users of the Time Warner Cable iPad app will be able to tune in to a host of Viacom programs thanks to a resolution in the legal skirmish between the two media companies. It goes on to say the happy ending to the litigation between the two were announced yesterday on a Viacom blog, which called it good news for consumers. It says here that Time Warner cable users will be able to grab such Viacom programs as Jersey Shore and The Daily Show with Jon Stewart via the Time Warner's iPad app. And also they're going to get, subscribers will get access to the other on-air channels from Viacom, including MTV Hits, MTV Jams, and Centric. It goes on to say those in New York City and other major markets will additionally receive TV HD and BET HD. So they put together, I guess, a resolution of this conflict. And, the question is, what is the future of that? I mean, we're going to see more and more TV on the iPad. I mean, I mentioned a while ago there's a fantastic app that's in beta stage. It's not even an app. It's a website that works only with like iPads and iPhones and other smart tablets, and it's called Aereo, A-E-R-E-O. And eventually they're going to charge $12 a month to stream the free TV that you get over the airwave. Now, the problem in New York City is that, there are all these tall buildings, so it's really hard to receive over the air the free digital TV that the networks broadcast. And, so Aereo, that's AEREO.com, allows you to stream to your iPad. And what they claim is that they have little antennas associated with your account somewhere in a warehouse in Brooklyn, and that is then just being broadcast from your little antenna. That's how they get around the copyright stuff. But anyways, one thing that I don't like about the Time Warner iPad app and other cable iPad apps is essentially you have to be in a Wi-Fi network that is connected to your cable modem. So I get my internet through the Time Warner cable modem. So the Time Warner app senses that, and it senses that I have a cable box. So it won't work, let's say, if I'm somewhere else in the city away from my Time Warner cable box. It only works by confirming that you're in an apartment that has a Time Warner subscription. On the other hand, there is some consumer upside to it, and that is that you can control your cable box and DVR through the Time Warner app. So that's pretty cool. Like, you can actually schedule recordings, and actually it acts as a better control than the remote control, because you could see what films or TV shows you've already recorded, and you can access and play the recordings, and you can actually control more than one box, because I can control one box in my living room and one in my bedroom. So it's very cool. Okay, so this is what the Time Warner app looks like. On the left, you've got the channels. Now, they're not all the channels that you get on your cable, and you can let's see, go to a channel. I'm going to go to ABC, and it switches and it goes to ABC. It generally works okay. Now, I don't think that there is. Let's see. There we go. There's ABC streaming. I don't think that it has AirPlay built in, but you can mirror the screen. If you have an iPad 3 or 2 or an iPhone 4S, you can mirror the screen. And on the bottom you have like 4 buttons: live TV. You've got the guide, and the guide here you can, I guess, record stuff in the future. And so even if you don't have the channel, you can, and then you have access to the DVR, and you can switch DVRs. Right now it's looking at one DVR, but I can switch. If you go to devices under settings, you can switch to the other DVR. And here we go. And it's not seamless. It's it takes a little while to connect. And then you have parental controls, closed captioning, favorites, and sign out. So it could be a little smoother, the app, but it's a good utility. Particularly, let's say you're in your bedroom and your spouse wants to watch something on TV. You can watch something else on TV, or something that's recorded in the DVR. So it's a good utility, and I think they're going to roll out stuff like this more often. Now, there's a companion story to this story about how Time Warner and Viacom have come to a resolution over the iPad app. And it's pretty humorous, and MacRumors.com had a story about this on May 14th, Monday, 2012. And basically, the story is that the CEO of Time Warner's cable company hasn't heard of Apple's AirPlay. And this is just shocking, because AirPlay, to me, is just transforming the way we consume video and television shows, because there's everyone's talking about an official Apple TV coming that is a big screen TV where there is content from the internet for free that you can watch. And I feel like that's already there because of AirPlay on the iPad and the Apple TV that's currently just like the size of a hockey puck. And the fact that the head of a cable company hasn't heard of it is astonishing, and just shows how out of touch they are, the leaders of these cable companies and traditional media, with the massive change that's going on in technology. Because there are all these like television-like apps, some of them not tied to my cable box, on my iPad, and through AirPlay and mirroring of AirPlay from the iPad or the iPhone, I can watch them on my big screen TV. So the story is pretty funny, and it says here, actually they're quoting the New York Times. So apparently the CEO said, quote, "I am not sure I know what AirPlay is," end quote, he said, though he noted that he was an enthusiastic Apple customer. Quote, "Today we want to be on every screen. Today it's a little bit clunky to get programming from the internet onto the TV. Not so hard to get it on your iPad. What's hard is the plumbing. What wires do we connect? What device do you use?" So the current Apple TV, the little thing, the hockey puck, really doesn't do anything to help enable you to get internet material to on your TV. So he doesn't know what he's talking about, because the AirPlay function gets much more content than exists on the Apple TV onto your TV. via your Apple TV. So it's pretty pathetic that, that this guy doesn't get it. I think his name is Britt. Let's see, what is his name? Glenn A. Britt, the chief executive of Time Warner Cable. He said he hasn't heard of the AirPlay service. So, well, I guess when he finds that his business is going out of business, he'll realize it's because of things like AirPlay. Okay, so one of the things that we've seen happening more often is that some prominent bloggers more and more are saying how they're ditching the traditional computer for their work for the iPad. And a writer over at TechRepublic.com named Seb Janasic had a post out on May 16th entitled "Bye Bye MacBook, Hello iPad, Why I'm Taking the Tablet." So he makes a number of good points. So Seb Janasic, he writes, he's a columnist, I guess he writes for TechRepublic, and he basically says that, he's pretty much ditched in terms of mobility writing using his MacBook. And he says that the iPad, has really become his go-to device as a journalist. He says, for example, "There's no doubt that the iPad is a fine device to watch stuff on. One of the best descriptions comes from the journalist and TV writer Charlie Brooker, who described it as a device, quote, ideal for idly browsing the web while watching telly," end quote. But then he goes on to say, "It performs this function very well, but 2 years after I first started to use it, I know it does a whole lot more. So much more that I suspect, based on my personal usage, that I can get by with a desktop Mac and an iPad and cut out Mr. Laptop altogether." So his home setup is a mid-2007 24-inch iMac, a mid-2010 13-inch MacBook Pro, and a third-generation 32-gigabyte Wi-Fi iPad. And he estimates his usage ratio as 20-10-70. In other words, he's spending 70% of his time on his iPad and only 10% of his time on his MacBook Pro. And he says that, it's not ideal having a lack of a physical keyboard. But he basically says that he has been writing a lot on the iPad. And he goes on to say, "I admit that even now I probably make more mistakes on a soft iPad keyboard than I do on a real one, yet these errors do not represent enough of a problem to stop me using it for writing, and certainly not when considering the device's wider benefits." And the wider benefits are the quick access and portability. He basically says that he uses the iPad as his main email and browsing machine. He says it's excellent for managing social media channels. And he says there are endless Twitter clients and WordPress apps that let you post articles, review, and publish comments and get headline traffic. He loves Apple's Pages app. He says it's his favorite since the Windows version of WordPerfect 5.2, which obviously was a long time ago. And so overall, it's a major productivity app he finds. He says that spreadsheets are the most problematic on the iPad. He says, "I'm not a fan of either the Mac or iPad version of Numbers, so still looking for a solution on that issue." So I think you're going to see more and more of that. I mean, my setup, I'll tell you, is that I have a 27-inch iMac and currently a 64 gigabyte iPad, third generation, and I do have a MacBook Air, because sometimes for serious editing of podcasts and such, while I could do it on my iPad, I do find it quicker to do it on a MacBook Air when I'm in a mobile situation. But I think you're going to see more and more people ditch laptops for iPads and maybe supplement their iPad with a powerful desktop unit like an iMac or even a Mac Pro. Okay, since the last episode of the iPad podcast, one of the recurring stories that's been out there in the in the tech news is that there have been all sorts of leaks and people saying it's pretty much confirmed that Apple is going to launch an iPad mini in the second half of this year. Now, obviously, Apple is not confirming this. Now, I'm looking at the website Cnet, and they have a story that came out on May 18th that says Apple has reportedly already tagged, this is what the story says, LCD suppliers for an iPad mini with an eye toward launching the tablet in the second half of the year. The latest scuttlebutt, according to the story, comes from Taiwan news outlet Liberty Times. And it says that the iPad mini could start shipping by the end of the third quarter with a goal of 6 million units. And it says here that the big tech, the tech interface or whatever screen companies LG and OAU Optronics have already passed Apple's certification tests to provide the tablet's LCD panel, the report said. And another blog, according to CNET, called Maka Takara, said that TPK Holding, another supplier presumably for Apple, will produce 4 million backlight modules, and some other company called Chimi Inolex providing an additional 2 million. So, they basically claim that the mini iPad will be 7 inches in size. And one report says that the tablet would offer 8 gigabytes of storage and sell for $200. Look, personally, I do think that Apple at some point is going to come out with a 7-inch iPad. I think it's going to have the same resolution as the second generation iPad and the first generation iPad. So in other words, it'll be just in a more compressed screen. Developers are not going to have to do anything to adjust to the iPad mini. In other words, they'll just make it for the same resolution as the iPad 2, and it'll run on the iPad mini. So you'll have smaller icons on the iPad 2 because it'll be, smaller geography but the same layout as on the iPad mini. It'll be a smaller geography but the same layout as an iPad 2. Now, for $200, that presents a conundrum for Apple, an iPad mini at $200, 8 gigabytes, because the iPod Touch, which is 8 gigabytes entry price, goes for $200. So does it make sense for Apple to have 2 tablet devices selling for $200 that are very similar, but one has a bigger size? So I suspect that the iPad mini will sell, the bottom end of the iPad mini, the lowest, the cheapest one, will sell for, I'm going to say, $280 or $300. And then you have the iPod Touch at $200 entry level. So, or maybe they'll drop the iPod Touch entry level to $150. What if they could get the production down so that it's $150? So then you could have the iPod Touch starting at $150, have the iPad mini at $250, and then you have the full and iPad 3 at $500. And then remember, you have the second generation iPad still selling at $400. So then you have a pricing range of between $150 and the high-end iPad 3 is like, what, $826 or $830, something like that. So I think Apple's going to do it. Now, they're going to do it not only because it's going to be cheaper, but because it's lighter and more mobile. And I do think there's a demand by people to have something that is lighter to hold, smaller to carry, that's smaller than the iPad and bigger than the iPod Touch. I do see a lot of people with the Kindle and the Nook, that's Barnes & Noble's e-reader. And I think one of the reasons they like it is because it's easy to hold in one hand when you're reading a book. Now, the iPad, whether it's the first generation, second generation, or third generation, is too heavy to really hold for any length of time with one hand. And that's a problem. Like in major cities like New York City, people are riding the subways, and they generally, if they're standing, have to hold on to a pole. And you can't hold on to a pole and read the iPad because it's too heavy. You'd have to sit down on a bench and get one of those, few seats that are available to commuters. So I'm pretty excited by it because I think once they get like an iPad mini, they're going to, you're going to just see even more iPads all over the place. Okay, so Apple's WWDC, the Worldwide Developers Conference, is just around the corner. It starts June 11th, less than a month away. And it's expected that Apple is going to announce iOS 6, the sixth version of the operating system for the iPad and the iPhone, on that day. And there's a lot of reports now as to what's going to be in iOS 6. And it's going to be exciting. I think Apple's going to really step up in the face of competition from Android on the smartphone platform, and to maintain its lead in the tablet platform, Apple's going to really try to improve the operating system and what these devices can do. And one of the more intriguing reports about what iOS 6 has concerns the map function. And I'm reading about this story on MacRumors.com. They're linking to a report from 9to5Mac that says that Apple is going to be moving away from using Google Maps in the operating system and going to their own in-house mapping service, and that it'll include 3D features. Now, if you're familiar with Apple's iOS for the iPhone and the iPad and iPod Touch, you probably know that Google Maps, is on it, but also a lot of apps use Google Maps, and I think that's because built into the operating system is the ability for developers to use built-in services like Google's map service. But the thing is, Apple has been, having a falling out with Google. They used to be best friends when the iPhone first came out in 2007. Google, even before there were any app store or apps for sale, Apple had Google Maps as an app on the iPhone. But then, as we all know, Steve Jobs, feels that Google betrayed him and started competing with Apple by making the Android operating system and giving it away for free. So this isn't surprising that Apple would develop its own mapping service, because it's a risk to Apple as a business, because if Apple's in competition with Google and the Android devices, how can it ensure that Google Maps will be optimized to work well for the iOS devices? And also, there are reports that Google is now charging significant money for apps to have access to Google Maps. And we do know that a little while ago, the update to the iOS and the release of the iPhoto app for the iPad revealed that in the iPhoto app, instead of using Google Maps, Apple is using an open source mapping service. But Apple has deep resources, right? I mean, Apple has something like $100 billion in savings stored up, and it's not surprising that Apple would develop its own mapping function. That's going to be big for everybody on the internet. Google Maps is the best service so far, but mapping services is something that everybody wants and needs. So it says here that last year Apple purchased a 3D mapping company called C3 Technologies, as well as some other companies like PlaceBase and Poly9. And according to the article, those acquisitions are going to now bear fruit in iOS 6. So apparently, people who have seen, according to the leaks, this 3D mode in the mapping service are kind of blown away by it. And this is the quote that MacRumors has. The most important aspect of the new Maps application is a powerful new 3D mode. The 3D mode does not come enabled by default, but users simply need to click a 3D button that is conveniently and visibly stored in the app, perhaps under the fold under the current traffic pin and map view buttons. This 3D mode is said to essentially be technology straight from C3 Technologies. Beautiful, realistic graphics based on declassified missile target algorithms. So this is pretty cool. it could really be amazing. Now, they point out that the Wall Street Journal's All Things Digital also commented on this. And the Wall Street Journal, which is a pretty reliable newspaper, and All Things Digital, Walt Mossberg's, affiliated website, said the following, quote, "We've independently confirmed that this is indeed the case. Sources describe the new maps as a forthcoming tent-pole feature of iOS that will, in the words of one, blow your head off. I'm not quite sure what that means, and the source in question declined to elaborate, but it's likely a reference to the photorealistic 3D mapping tech Apple acquired when it purchased C3 Technologies." So what does tentpole feature mean? Well, when Apple does its initial announcement on the 11th regarding iOS 6, in the past, it usually highlights 4 or 5 big features. And so the tentpole refers to a circus, because these announcements are like a circus. You're trying to wow the audience. And remember, in the big top, Barnum and Bailey's, Ringling Brothers circus, they have different tents, and what's under the big tent pole is usually the most significant circus act. So the map feature may be one of the most significant features of this upgrade to iOS 6, and I got to tell you, I'm really looking forward to it. I mean, one of the things that I love about Apple's platform and the iPhone and the iPad is just the onslaught of innovation that comes from Apple. I mean, you're also seeing the innovation in Apple's competitor, Google, with the Android devices and its services online. And this sort of technology innovation is very inspiring. I mean, really, almost like on a weekly basis or a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, we're just seeing all sorts of cool upgrades that make technology more vibrant and more interesting and more futuristic. Okay, so, one of the things that's great about the new technology is that more and more stuff is tied to the cloud, right? That means data on servers, not in your home, but on, servers of companies, right? So Apple has iCloud heavily integrated into its operating system for the iPhone and the iPad, and so your data is backed up there, and Apple tries to keep it safe and secure. But one thing we have to be worried about is privacy and safety. And there's a story out from PadGadget.com that says that there is a software tool now out that allows the police to, it says here, new tool lets cops swipe your iPad, and iPhone data remotely. And it says here that there's a company called Elcom Soft, and it has a software tool called Phone Password Breaker, which is a cracking tool, and it's able to automatically download your iOS device backups from iCloud. And it says all investigators need is a valid Apple ID and password to access backups in real time while the device is still in the hands of a suspect. So I guess what this means is, though, that the police have to figure out your password and Apple ID. It says here, according to the company, approximately 125 million Apple users store data in iCloud. And it says, previously, the phone password breaker software required investigators to be in physical possession of a device or a PC device that had been synced with in order to download data. But now it works with iCloud because the company was able to crack the communications protocol used by Apple. So I don't know if this is legal. I mean, I don't know how the police can crack into Apple's servers without Apple's permission. It sounds a little sketchy. It says here's what the company says, Elcom, about its software. It says Elcom Soft researchers analyzed the communication protocol connecting iPhone users with iCloud and were able to emulate the correct commands in order to retrieve the content of iUsers' iCloud storage. It's important to note that unlike offline backups that may come encrypted and must be broken into, a time-consuming operation, data retrieved from iCloud is received in plain, unencrypted form. The 5 gigabytes of storage space can be retrieved in reasonable time. But then it goes on to say, of course, in order to access the data, investigators must have your Apple ID and your password. Without a valid password or ID, the service does not work. So I'm not sure what that means. I mean, they're only going to be able to get it if they have your password. I guess, what are they saying, that that the police are going to somehow guess your password? So, I mean, it would be nice if Apple made it so that you cannot know, even if somebody had your password or your user account, that they could not access your iCloud backup, that they would need to confirm your hardware connection, your MAC address that for your computer or for your iPad. So I don't know. I think this story is a little, sketchy. I really don't know how useful this is, because again, the police would need your password and your ID, so it's a little strange. And frankly, if they were going to reach out to Apple for your password and your ID, why would they need to somehow secretly break into iCloud? So it's a little sketchy, this story. Okay, so the next story is not that surprising. It's entitled Apple's iPad 4G branding changes across Europe, and it's on Cnet. So what's going on is that Apple's new third-generation iPad, Apple's changing the branding and how it sells it overseas in Europe, and I think also in Australia. It no longer is saying it's a 4G device. Now, the third-generation iPad in the United States can work on something that is known as 4G data, and that is the LTE networks of Verizon and AT&T. But that LTE type of connection doesn't work for the third generation iPad in Europe or in Australia. And I previously mentioned that in Australia, some government agency did not take kindly to Apple marketing the iPad as 4G. I think in print or in the fine print, Apple does disclose that when you go to Europe or Australia or outside of the United States, that the LTE capabilities of the iPad third generation do not work, and it just works on 3G networks. But obviously what happened was Apple got enough heat about leaving the term 4G on the boxes and in the marketing that Apple in Europe, and I think also in Australia, is retreating and no longer marketing the third generation iPad overseas as being 4G data connection. But in the United States, I can tell you, it is a 4G device. My iPad gets tremendous speeds over the LTE network in New York on Verizon, and I think that's one of the biggest features of the third generation iPad. Okay, so now if you're a big fan of Facebook games, there's a way now to get Facebook games on the iPad. The Facebook app is not the way, but according to a website, PadGadget.com, the long, existing iPad app iSwifter has recently been updated to allow it to work with Facebook games. And on May 17th, as PadGadget reports, iSwifter announced that it plans to supplement the Facebook experience on iSwifter by providing mobile device owners with an app to play all of those Flash-based Facebook games like Farmville and Frontierville. So it says the app is called The Works for Facebook, and it'll look like Facebook's own app, and ads will appear on the right-hand side, and Facebook games will be streamed using iSwifter's cloud-based streaming platform. And it says here users will also be able to access payments using Facebook credits as well as other non-game apps through the app hub within the app. Now, I guess they're going to be giving Apple a cut of this. It says it's clear, this is the iSwifter guide, that Facebook users are moving to mobile faster than even Facebook predicted, said Rajaj Gupta, founder of iSwifter. The Works, that's WORX, is intended to benefit from Facebook users who can't play games on the Facebook iPad app or on the mobile Facebook site. as well as Facebook itself. So personally, I never play any of those Facebook games, so this isn't big for me. But this workaround by iSwifter, I guess does make sense. The question is, is iSwifter somehow sharing the revenue with Apple? And if not, Apple could do something about it. But iSwifter has long been like one of the ways to access Flash on the iPad, because the problem with not a problem, I think it's a virtue, but from day one the iPad browser and other apps aren't designed to work with Flash content. But Apple did allow the iSwifter Flash browser to work on the iPad, and that's one way to see Flash on your iPad. So interesting update is, so I guess there's obviously a lot of Facebook users on the iPad, and so maybe this will appease some of them. Well, if you're into jailbreaking your iDevices like the iPhone and the iPad, you've been generally out of luck in recent weeks and months in terms of having a jailbroken iPad 3 or having a jailbroken iPhone 4S or iPad 2 running iOS 5.1, because the pretty much only jailbreaks that have existed have been running iOS 5.0 and not on the iPad 3, which is different hardware. But according to a website called T3.com, the jailbreak community is getting close to having a solution for the iPad 3 and the iPhone 4S. It says here in a story that a hacker has claimed to have jailbroken iOS 5.1.1 and promises that iPhone 4S and new iPad owners will also be able to do the same. And so I guess on Twitter, this person who's in the jailbreak community said this. He said, as I said early in Twitter, there's still a lot to do to have a user-friendly and well-tested tool to install the jailbreak on end user's device. Expect a release in a couple of weeks. So maybe they're waiting actually to do it around WWDC when iOS 6 comes out. It says, with anticipation building over the arrival of iOS 6.0, rumored to be launching at WWDC, it was iOS 5.1.1 that managed to draw enough interest from users, resulting in the impending jailbreak becoming a reality. So, I personally don't mind jailbreaking, and I like it because it allows me to tweak my iPhone and my iPad. One of the reasons I tweak my iPad, at least my iPad 2 is jailbroken, is to run Display Recorder, which is a great video screen recording app that allows you to screen record what you're doing on the iPad or the iPhone. And it's a great way to demonstrate to people how to use apps or to do, demonstrations for video podcasts. So Apple hasn't allowed video screen recording on the iPad or iPhone, so the only way to do it is through jailbreaking. So I think I personally think that the jailbreak community actually helps Apple innovate, because some of the tweaks that the jailbreakers make to the iDevices, I don't know if you see it, but eventually Apple sort of incorporates them into the iOS, so they become legitimate tweaks at some point. So I really hope the jailbreakers continue in their ability to jailbreak these devices, because it spurs on innovation. That's and really, if you think about it, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, they were jailbreakers themselves, because if you think about it, when they created the blue box for hacking into AT&T's network back in the early 70s, they were essentially jailbreaking AT&T's phone network. So, this is where innovation comes from. Okay, so one of the most successful apps that first came out on the iPhone in the early days of the iPhone was Bejeweled. And Bejeweled has never really had a great iPad version. And TouchArchade reports on May 17th that the company that makes Bejeweled has released Bejeweled HD for the iPad. Costs $3.99, and TouchArchade gives it a pretty good review. Now, there's been a universal version of Bejeweled's free Bejeweled Blitz app, but that was a universal version, and this Bejeweled HD, according to TouchArchade, is very beautiful, and is kind of stunning, and they give it a kind of in-depth review. Now, I'm not a big Bejeweled player, but I suspect that there are lots of people who love Bejeweled who have Retina display iPads, and if you're a big Bejeweled player, maybe it's worth getting this $3.99 iPad. So you might want to check it out. It looks like they did some very substantial upgrade, and the people who are posting reviews are giving it 5 stars. One person writes, "Like many, I've been waiting for an iPad version of Bejeweled, and it was well worth the wait to play with it with the new Retina graphics, but don't think twice about buying this game." Now, another person writes, "The legendary Bejeweled is back in our new iPad." So, this is one of the most successful games in the iOS platform. So if you're into it, it's probably worth spending $4 for it. So check it out. Now, one of the things that people have been developing for the iPad are sort of retro games or retro applications. For example, we've seen like the Korg application, which is really a software version of an old music generating module from the hardware company Korg. And of course, we've seen Space Invaders and other simple games from the early days of gaming. Well, there's a Kickstarter project that the website LaughingSquid.com found that seeks to turn your iPad into an old-time Etch-a-Sketch. And it's called Etcher, E-T-C-H-E-R. And actually, it's a Kickstarter project that involves both an app and a case that looks like the old-time Etcher-Sketchers with the knobs. And so the guy doing it is named Ari Krupnik, and he's doing it on Kickstarter. Here is the Kickstarter page. And so he's seeking to raise $75,000. And so far, with 20 days to go, he's raised $19,260. And so basically, if you pledge $45 or more, you, as an early adopter, you can get the first batch in red of this Etcher device, plus, I guess, there's free shipping in the United States. If you pledge more than $60, you get an Etcher of your choice in red or blue. And if you pledge more than $75 or $75, you get a special color that they'll never produce again. And you'll also get, I don't know what. But anyways, look, do you really want to, I don't know if I'm a big fan of these, games, harken back to games from 30 years ago, because in a way it's kind of silly, because the games 30 years ago were at the dawn of this technological revolution, and the Etcher-Sketcher was an incredibly limited device. So why would you pay to have such a limited function on your iPad? And I know there's a lot of nostalgia involved, but who is the Etcher-Sketcher for? Is it for the adults who remember what they played, 30 years ago? Or is it for the kids now who don't remember what they played 30 years ago? And why would they want to control drawing on the iPad with the old Etcher-Sketcher knobs on the left and right? So, I don't know. I'm not a fan of this. I think I would rather see, modern games developed for the iPad and not this sort of artificial hearkening back to, technology that existed 30 years ago. Like, why take modern technology now and try to make it look like something that existed 30 years ago? But anyways, If you're interested, I have a link to the original story, which then takes you to the Kickstarter page. Okay, so there are a lot of Twitter clients on the iPad, and recently a new one came out called Thirst. That's THIRST, and it's sort of like many Twitter clients, but also it's sort of like Flipboard, which is that app that takes feeds from news sources or your social media accounts. So it's a blend of both. So to some extent, it's a free app. It's called Thirst. And if you're looking at the video version of this, here's a screencast. And so it's sort of a simple setup. On the left, you have your account name. Mine is Max Future. Then you have newspaper mode. And newspaper mode is sort of like Flipboard. You have the main stories from your Twitter feed sort of organized in tiles. That seems to be the big thing. And you can scroll up to see more of the topics that are trending. So it sort of takes your Twitter feed and organizes it with these tiles into, what content that you think you're the most interested in. For example, Apple is one of the biggest sources of information. Facebook, which they just had an IPO. Twitter, Microsoft, App Store. Donna Summer, she just passed away. Barack Obama, SpaceX, Windows 8. So it's a simple way to just sort of see what you're interested in. So, for example, I'm going to click on Facebook, and this will give me tweets, I guess, from the people I'm following or on Twitter to begin with that discuss the, Facebook IPO. So there's that. Now, you can also, have sliding windows pop out. And, for example, there's a story about how John Gruber of Daring Fireball looks like he left the 5x5 network. That pops out. And so it's very much somewhat like Flipboard, but it's Twitter-centric. So what else? Then you can go to your timeline, and just like any Twitter client, now to some extent it's not as, it's not as powerful as, I don't think it's as powerful as the, the other Twitter clients like Tweetbot. And then you have new mentions mode, if anybody's mentioning me. Then trends, so it sort of takes Twitter trends and shows what's trending big on Twitter. And then search. So it's not a bad app. It's kind of nice. So think of it like Flipboard for Twitter. And, you can't beat the price. It's free. So check it out. It looks pretty cool. Okay, so one of the nice things about the iPad is that you can read ebooks. And one of the cool things about iBooks, which is the ebook reading application on the iPad, is that Apple has made it so that you can really review multimedia books that have been developed to not just be text, but diagrams, interactive pictures, and video. And one guy I listened to, who's on the internet, I guess he's now with 5x5, is the David Sparks, who's Max Sparky blog, I guess. And he has issued a new book for $4.99 called Paperless. And I kind of like it because it's, I bought it and I went through it and I found it very helpful. Basically, the book teaches you how you can go paperless and organize and scan all your documents using, let's say, the Fujitsu SnapScan, and get it to work well on your Macintosh using like a program like Hazel that automates and makes it easy to quickly file stuff and organize all your electronic files. So he basically discusses the process, but the book is sort of very well organized, and overall, I think I give it a thumbs up. It's gotten, I guess, generally 5 stars. But the cool part about it is that it's one of these books that was created with the iBook author utility. So you've got a lot of interesting content. You've got there's a lot of video in this program, and there's also a lot of pictures and a lot of diagrams. So within the book, there's like video tutorials on how to use Automator on the Macintosh or how to use Hazel. So it's very good use, I think, of the multimedia features that iBooks can now have, particularly with the iBooks Author program. Now, one thing that I warn you is that it's massive in size, so it'll take up a lot of room. I think it's just under like a gigabyte worth of storage. So it's called Paperless by David Sparks, and it works on iBooks. And overall, I think I think you should get, if you have any interest at all in scanning paper and getting rid of paper and organizing it on your Mac, and this is really for people with Macintoshes, you should probably think about investing the $4.99 into David Sparks' book, because he does a pretty comprehensive job of giving you an overview of a very good workflow to do this sort of thing. He points out that the book includes 32 screencasts, 4 movies, and has 26,000 words, and it'll turn you into a paperless ninja. So check it out. I think it's worthwhile. Okay, so one of the things that people are always looking for their iPad is a stand. And cultofmac.com, a great website for Macintosh-related news and stuff, related to Apple, had a really nice post about somebody who took their old iMac. Do you remember the old G4 iMac, the one with the rounded sort of ball-like base and with the monitor sticking up? So somebody, I guess on Reddit, named CWT Fozzie, built for himself a iPad stand from an old iMac 4G, G4. And there is no step-by-step, as far as I know, as how he did this, but this is kind of cool. It looks kind of cool with the iPad sort of as the replacement monitor for this iMac that had this rounded base. So people can do some clever things with their old Apple devices to make them work with their newer Apple devices. Now, one of the things that you can do with an iPad is use it for presentations. It makes a great presentation tool, particularly for running slides at speaking engagements. And, it long has been that if you wanted to run a PowerPoint, really the best way to do it is use Apple's Keynote app, which can convert a PowerPoint to run on Keynote. And Keynote's a great program for creating slides and running slides. It's obviously a competitor to Microsoft's PowerPoint, but PowerPoint is sort of the standard. Well, there's been some tools to use, but recently one of those tools got a major update, SlideShark. Now, SlideShark is also a website where you can host your slides and share them with other people. And they have updated their app, which is free, and it works even better now with PowerPoint. The best part is that it has presenter mode so that you can see your notes and a timer and an animation counter and more. And it also works with the first generation iPad with a projector and TV support, full screen mode. They say it's 3 to 5 times faster. And I've tested it, and it seems to work pretty well. So let me give you a look at it. I'm going to do a little screencast. So if you have the video version, I'll show you and also walk you through it. Okay, so this is what SlideShark looks like. Now, one thing that's a little weird about it is that it's really linked to your online account. And for free, SlideShark gives you 100 megabytes. So one way to load your slides onto the app are to from a computer, load it up to your account on the internet. And you get 100 megabytes worth of storage, And, you can really store a lot of apps like that, a lot of slideshows. And where they make money is where, you can have enterprise accounts or have, pay for additional storage beyond 100 megabytes. But the 100 megabytes is free. So here's the weird thing. Like normally, let's say you email to yourself a PowerPoint, you can choose to open it in this program, but then before you can play it in the program, if you want to be able to play it in the program, you upload it to your account, and then you download it back to your account on the app. It's a little convoluted in that way. It'd be nice if you could. I guess the point is they want you to have these on the internet because then you're more likely to pay for more space. So anyways, that's the one little weird thing about it. But once you download it on your device, it's a pretty cool PowerPoint presenter, and it works well with AirPlay so that it can play wirelessly through any device or service that has AirPlay video. Now what I did is I exported Apple's Keynote on Keynote in a PowerPoint format, so that's my guinea pig here. But if this is the app interface, and basically you see the PowerPoints that you have. Here I have just Apple's Keynote getting started, and you have this settings bar, and you can earn more storage if you recommend people. You can give feedback. You can rate the app. Now, when you launch, here I'm going to launch the PowerPoint. See, this is, if you pinch together your fingers, you can bring up this view of all the slides, which is pretty cool. And then on the left, you have these buttons like the home button if you want to go back, the information button, if you want to, I guess, edit, or you can hide the slides. That's pretty cool. You just press the hide button and then select the slides that you want to hide, and then you're done. If you want to unhide them, you unselect them. What else? You can reorder the slides. So it's basically hide the slides or reorder them, which is a nifty tool, I guess, in a presentation. And you can enable sharing to share the PowerPoints. Now, let's go back to the slide itself. So when you're running the slide, let's see, if you wanted to go to a different mode, you can on your device see the notes with the slide. So this is very useful. Right now you're seeing a screenshot of what the presenter would have, and I have this note area, and then I can start a timer that I can see how long I'm talking. And what's nice is you have a timer also for each slide. So you can see how much time you're spending on each slide and also the overall time. And you can swipe forward on this little area in the top right where the slides are to jump ahead. And I think this is the most useful part of it, having your notes with your slides, because you can put just like an image on the slide and then talk your notes. So the other view is without the notes, but just the current slides with the future slides, and that's what this mode looks like. And then the final mode is just full screen. So this is what the user, the viewer sees, and that's what you would see. And if you want to get out of this mode, you just pinch your fingers together, and you can get out of the mode and go back into current slide mode. So look, it's a free app and a free service, and if you're used to presenting stuff in PowerPoint and having them be more compatible with the PowerPoint playing app on the iPad, I think this is a good solution. Personally, I think the Keynote slides are beautiful, and if I can, I'll try to present it in Keynote. But I know there are a lot of people who use PowerPoint on their computers, and if they want to have a PowerPoint client that doesn't have any conversion issues. Now, one of the problems with converting PowerPoint to Keynote is that Keynote doesn't support, let's say, some fonts or some transitions or animations that might be in PowerPoint. So the more complicated your PowerPoint is, there is a greater possibility that Keynote won't translate it very well. So anyways, Slide Shark, check it out. It seems pretty cool. And again, the price is right. It's free. Okay, so that's it for episode 99 of the iPad podcast. This is Lex at Mac's Future. Hey, thanks for listening, and maybe next week will definitely be the 100th episode of the iPad podcast. So thanks for listening, and you can help support this podcast by just, going to iTunes and giving it some positive review. That way other people can see it and maybe subscribe to it, or go to YouTube and look up Mac'sFuture.com, and you can give it a review there, or on Blip TV, also the Mac's Future channel. So thanks for listening. This is Lex at iPad Podcast. Take care.
This has been a Mac's Future production.